3 nights a week, Julia kissed me goodbye at 7:30 sharp. Same routine for 7 years. Scrubs pressed, hair pulled back, that tired smile she wore like armor against my questions. "Another night shift, honey," she'd say, grabbing her purse and the thermos I'd filled with coffee. "Don't wait up." I never did wait up. Tom Bradley, construction foreman, gets up at 5:30 every morning. By the time Julia's Honda pulled into our driveway at dawn, I was already showering, preparing for another day of managing concrete pours and arguing with subcontractors who thought building codes were suggestions. But last Tuesday, insomnia grabbed me by the throat. Lying in our king-size bed, staring at the ceiling fan that squeaked every third rotation, I started adding numbers in my head. Not sheep, numbers, the kind that don't lie. Julia's paycheck covered her car payment and groceries. Mine handled the mortgage, utilities, and everything else. Simple math. Except the credit card statements showed restaurant charges on nights she worked. Gas station purchases 40 miles from Mercy General Hospital. Hotel bookings that made no sense. I'd mentioned it once, maybe 6 months ago. "Hey, Jules, why's there a charge from Romano's Italian on your card? Thought you brought lunch to work?" She'd laughed, that musical sound that used to make my chest tighten with affection. "Oh, that. Donna and I grabbed dinner before our shift. You know how crazy the ER gets. Better to eat something decent before the chaos starts." Made sense. Donna Martinez, Julia's friend from nursing school, worked the same schedule. They'd been partners for years, covering each other's backs during the worst nights Mercy General could throw at them. Except Donna had been posting Facebook photos from her family barbecues every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for the past month. Donna, who supposedly worked nights with my wife, grilling hamburgers for her kids at 7 p.m. The squeaking fan completed another rotation. I rolled over, grabbed my phone, and scrolled through Donna's social media. There she was, last Thursday at 8:15 p.m., tagged at her daughter's soccer practice. The same Thursday Julia had kissed me goodbye for another brutal night shift. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything important and left me with ribs and regret. Friday morning, Julia returned home as usual. I was already dressed, work boots laced, thermos in hand. She looked exhausted, hair slightly mussed, lipstick gone. "Rough night?" I asked, the same question I'd been asking for 7 years. "The worst," she replied, heading straight for our bedroom. 3 car accidents, 2 heart attacks, and a kitchen fire victim. I'm wiped out." I nodded, kissed her forehead, and left for work. But instead of driving to the construction site, I made a detour to Mercy General. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty at 6 a.m., just a few cars belonging to the overnight staff finishing their shifts. I didn't see Julia's Honda anywhere. The security guard at the information desk was friendly enough, a retired cop named Pete, who recognized me from the few times I'd picked Julia up after particularly long shifts. "Hey, Tom, here for Julia?" "Yeah, thought I'd surprise her. Which floor is the ER again?" "3rd floor, but she's not here, buddy. Julia switched to day shifts about 3 years ago. Thought you knew." The hollow feeling in my chest expanded, swallowing my lungs, my heart, everything that kept me upright and breathing. "Day shifts," I repeated. "Yeah, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Great schedule, really. Most folks prefer days once they get the seniority." I thanked Pete and walked back to my truck, legs moving without conscious thought. 3 years. Julia had been lying to me for 3 years about working nights, which meant she'd been somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else, for 3 nights every week. The drive home took forever, and no time at all. Julia's car was in our driveway, windows down, interior still warm. I pressed my palm against the hood. Hot. She'd been driving recently, not sleeping after a long hospital shift. Inside, I could hear the shower running. Julia always showered immediately after work, washing away the antiseptic smell and other people's emergencies. Except now I knew she wasn't washing away hospital odors. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the coffee cup she'd left behind. Lipstick stains on the rim, a shade I didn't recognize. Darker than what she usually wore, more dramatic. The kind of lipstick a woman might choose for a date. The shower stopped. I heard Julia moving around our bedroom, opening drawers, humming something under her breath. She sounded happy, relaxed, the way she used to sound when we first got married, when everything was new and full of possibility. When she emerged 20 minutes later, hair wrapped in a towel, wearing the terry cloth robe I'd given her for Christmas, she looked surprised to see me. "Tom? What are you doing home? Shouldn't you be at the site?" "Delayed pour," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Concrete truck broke down." She nodded, accepting my explanation without question. Why wouldn't she? We'd been accepting each other's explanations for years, building our marriage on a foundation of trust that was apparently one-sided. "I'm exhausted," she said, settling onto the couch with a cup of tea. "Think I'll sleep until this afternoon." I watched her curl up under the afghan her mother had crocheted, watched her close her eyes and pretend to be tired from saving lives instead of whatever she'd actually been doing for the past 12 hours. That afternoon, while Julia slept, I drove to Radio Shack and bought a GPS tracker. Nothing fancy, just a small magnetic device designed for keeping tabs on teenage drivers or elderly relatives who might get lost. The kind of thing that would stick to the underside of a car and transmit location data to a smartphone app. I waited until Sunday evening, after Julia had gone to bed early, claiming she needed rest before another tough week at the hospital. The tracker attached easily to her Honda's rear bumper, hidden behind the license plate where road dirt and shadows would keep it invisible. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in New England. Julia went through her usual routine: shower, scrubs, hair pulled back, that tired smile. "Another night shift, honey," she said, right on schedule. This time, I waited up. At 7:45 p.m., I was sitting in my truck 3 blocks from our house, engine running, GPS app open on my phone. The small red dot that represented Julia's Honda showed her heading east on Route 9, away from Mercy General Hospital, away from everything that made sense in our 7-year marriage. She drove for 37 minutes, past the medical district, past the shopping centers and chain restaurants that marked the boundary between our working-class neighborhood and the suburbs where doctors and lawyers built their dream homes. The red dot finally stopped moving in Meadowbrook Heights, a development of colonial houses and manicured lawns that I'd helped wire during my electrical apprenticeship 15 years ago. I knew those streets, quiet cul-de-sacs where children rode bicycles until dark, and every driveway held at least 2 cars worth more than my annual salary. The kind of neighborhood where people hired contractors like me to install crown molding and hardwood floors, then offered us bottled water while discussing their vacation plans to Europe. The red dot had stopped at 47 Sycamore Lane. I drove slowly through Meadowbrook Heights, windows down, trying to look like a contractor heading home from a late job. Number 47 was a large colonial with cream-colored siding and black shutters. Landscape lighting illuminated flower beds that someone spent serious money maintaining. A circular driveway held 3 vehicles: Julia's Honda, a silver Mercedes sedan, and a red minivan with soccer ball decals on the rear window. Through the large front windows, I could see warm light spilling from what looked like a living room. Shadows moved behind sheer curtains, people going about their evening routines, unaware that a stranger was cataloging their lives from the street. I parked 2 houses down and waited. At 8:30, the front door opened. Julia emerged, but she wasn't wearing scrubs anymore. Instead, she had on jeans and a sweater I'd never seen before, something soft and expensive-looking in a shade of blue that made her hair shine under the porch light. A man followed her outside. Tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that suggested regular gym membership rather than physical labor. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had never swung a hammer or mixed concrete. Julia turned to face him, and he pulled her close, hands settling on her waist like they belonged there. Like he'd done this 1,000 times before. She tilted her head up, and he kissed her. Not a quick peck or a friendly goodbye, but the kind of kiss that married people share when they're still crazy about each other. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white. 7 years of marriage, and Julia hadn't kissed me like that since our honeymoon. The front door opened again, and 2 children burst onto the porch. A boy, maybe 8 years old, wearing a Little League uniform. A girl, younger, clutching a stuffed animal that might have been a rabbit. "Mommy!" the girl called out, running toward Julia with the absolute confidence that only comes from knowing you're someone's whole world. Julia caught the child in her arms, spinning her around while the boy wrapped himself around her waist. She laughed, the same musical sound I'd been hearing for 7 years, but brighter somehow, more genuine than anything I'd witnessed in our own home. "Did you bring us anything?" the boy asked, and Julia reached into her purse, producing 2 small wrapped packages. I watched my wife, distribute gifts to children who called her mommy, while a stranger who kissed her like a husband stood watching with obvious affection. The man said something I couldn't hear from my position down the street, and Julia nodded. She hugged both children again, promised to see them soon, and walked back to her Honda. The man waited until she'd backed out of the driveway before waving goodbye and ushering the children inside. Julia drove past my truck without noticing me. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner before starting my engine and following the red dot on my phone back toward our neighborhood. She arrived home at 9:47 p.m., the same time she always returned from her Tuesday night shifts. I was already in bed pretending to sleep when I heard her key in the lock. She moved quietly through the house, showering again, brushing her teeth, slipping into bed beside me with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake their spouse. "How was work?" I asked, my voice rough with fake sleep. "Exhausting," she whispered. "Go back to sleep, honey." I lay there listening to her breathing gradually slow and deepen, wondering how long she'd been living this double existence. Wondering who the man was, how she'd met him, whether she loved him more than she'd ever loved me. Wondering if our entire marriage had been a lie. Wednesday crawled by like a wounded animal. I went through the motions at work, reviewing blueprints and coordinating deliveries, but my mind kept circling back to Sycamore Lane. To the way Julia had looked in that blue sweater, to the children who called her mommy. That evening, I cooked dinner and waited for Julia to come home from her legitimate job at the hospital. She arrived at 7:15, looking genuinely tired from an actual day of nursing. "How was your day?" she asked, settling at our kitchen table while I served the chicken and rice I'd prepared. "Fine," I replied. "Same old construction drama. How about you?" "Busy. We had a multi-car accident around noon, and the ER was chaos for hours." She spoke easily about her real work, describing patients and procedures with the professional competence I'd always admired. This was the Julia I'd married, intelligent, compassionate, dedicated to helping people. But it was also the Julia who'd been lying to me for years, using her legitimate job as cover for whatever was happening on Sycamore Lane. "You seem distracted," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Everything okay?" Her fingers were warm, familiar, decorated with the wedding ring I'd placed there 7 years ago. Looking at her face, the face I'd kissed goodbye thousands of times, the face that smiled at me from our wedding photos, I almost convinced myself that I'd imagined Tuesday night. Almost. "Just tired," I said. "Long week." She squeezed my hand. "Well, I've got another night shift Thursday, but maybe we can do something special this weekend. It's been too long since we had quality time together." Quality time, while she was building a second family in Meadowbrook Heights. Sounds great, I managed. Thursday evening, I was back in my truck, parked down the street from 47 Sycamore Lane. Julia's Honda arrived at 8:05 p.m., and the same routine played out. The man greeting her with a kiss, the children running to hug her, the easy intimacy of a family settling in for the evening. This time, I got out of my truck. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. I walked slowly along the sidewalk, trying to look like a neighbor out for an evening stroll. Most of the houses had their curtains drawn, but 47 Sycamore Lane's living room windows offered a clear view of the domestic scene inside. Julia was sitting on a large sectional sofa, the little girl curled against her side while she helped the boy with what looked like homework. The man, her husband, I realized with a sick certainty, was in the kitchen, visible through an archway, preparing something at the stove. It was a perfect tableau of family life, the kind of scene I'd imagined Julia and I might create someday, when we were ready for children and mortgages in neighborhoods like this one. Except Julia was already living that dream, just not with me. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. The camera lens wasn't great in low light, but I managed to capture several clear images of Julia with the children, of the man serving dinner, of all four of them sitting around a dining room table that probably cost more than my truck. 62 photographs later, I had documented every angle of my wife's secret life. The drive home took forever. I stopped at a 24-hour copy shop and printed every photo, creating a stack of evidence that felt heavier than concrete in my hands. At home, I spread the pictures across our kitchen table and stared at them until my eyes burned. Julia laughing with children who weren't ours. Julia being kissed by a man who wasn't me. Julia living a life I'd never been invited to join. I was still sitting there when she came home at 9:53 p.m. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the weight in my chest as I prepared for the conversation that would end my marriage. I'd been awake all night, arranging and rearranging the photographs, trying to find an order that would make the betrayal hurt less. There wasn't one. Julia emerged from our bedroom at 6:30, moving with the careful quiet of someone who thought their spouse was still sleeping. She'd showered and dressed in her real work clothes, the scrubs she wore to her actual job at Mercy General, not the jeans and sweater she'd changed into for her other family. "Morning, honey," she said, surprised to find me already up, already dressed, sitting at our kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. "Morning," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Thought we could have breakfast together before you head to work." Her smile was genuine, the kind of expression that had made me fall in love with her 8 years ago when we'd met at a hospital charity fundraiser. I'd been there as part of my construction company's community service requirement. She'd been volunteering at the registration table, and something about the way she'd laughed at my terrible jokes had convinced me to ask for her number. "This is nice," she said, settling into her chair and reaching for her coffee. "We should do this more often." "We should do a lot of things more often," I agreed, watching her take her first sip. She was beautiful in the morning light filtering through our kitchen window. 36 years old, with auburn hair that caught the sun and green eyes that had always seemed to see straight through to whatever I was thinking. Even now, knowing what I knew, I could understand why someone else might fall in love with her. "I made your favorite," I said, indicating the eggs. "Extra cheese just the way you like them." Julia smiled and took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Perfect," she said. "You always take such good care of me." That's when I placed the first photograph on the table beside her plate. It was one of the clearer shots from Thursday night. Julia on the sectional sofa, the little girl curled against her side, both of them laughing at something on the television. The image quality wasn't professional, but the subject matter was unmistakable. Julia's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. The eggs fell back onto her plate with a soft splat. "Tom," she said, her voice suddenly smaller. "What is this?" I placed the second photograph next to the first. This one showed Julia helping the boy with his homework, her hand covering his as she guided his pencil across the paper. "I think you know what it is," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. The third photograph captured the moment when the man had kissed her goodbye on Thursday night, his hands on her waist, her face tilted up toward his, both of them lost in the kind of intimacy that married couples share. Julia's coffee cup trembled in her hands. She set it down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter more than porcelain. "Tom, I can explain—" "Can you?" I interrupted, placing more photographs on the table. Julia reading bedtime stories, Julia serving dinner, Julia being hugged by children who called her mommy. "Because I'd love to hear how you explain working night shifts at a hospital when you've actually been playing house in Meadowbrook Heights." Her face went pale, the color draining away, until she looked like one of the patients she treated in the ER. She tried to speak, but only managed a small choking sound. I kept laying out photographs, creating a timeline of deception that stretched across our breakfast table. 7 years, Jules. 7 years of night shifts. 7 years of lying to my face every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. "It's not what you think," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because it looks like you've got yourself a whole other family. Husband, kids, house in the suburbs, the American dream, right there in living color." I placed the final photograph on the table. It showed all 4 of them around the dining room table, heads bowed as if saying grace before their meal. A perfect family portrait that didn't include me. Julia stared at the image, and something broke behind her eyes. Her shoulders started shaking, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "Tom, please, let me explain. It's complicated." Complicated. I stood up, the chair scraping against our linoleum floor. "You want to know what's complicated? Complicated is trying to figure out how my wife managed to have 2 husbands without either of us knowing about the other." That stopped her tears like a switch being flipped. She looked up at me with something that might have been surprise or might have been fear. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I'd spent the early morning hours researching property records and social media profiles. The house at 47 Sycamore Lane was owned by Lawson Pierce, a real estate agent who specialized in high-end residential properties. According to his Facebook profile, he was married to Julia Pierce and had 2 children, Emma and Jake. "Lawson Pierce," I said, watching her face. "Your husband. Except he thinks he's your only husband, doesn't he?" Julia's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The tears started again, but now they looked different. Less like grief, more like panic. "How long have you been married to him, Jules? Because our marriage certificate says 7 years, but those kids look older than that." She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside her chest. 8 years, she whispered through her fingers. "I've been married to Lawson for 8 years. The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of our refrigerator and the sound of Julia crying. I sat back down, trying to process the mathematics of her betrayal. "So you married him first," I said. She nodded without looking up. "And then you married me." Another nod. "Which means our marriage isn't legal." This time she looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks, her green eyes red and desperate. "Tom, I love you. I love both of you. I never meant for it to happen this way." But it did happen this way, for 7 years. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared the night before. Inside were photocopies of the pictures, along with a note I'd written in my careful block printing. "What's that?" Julia asked. "Insurance," I said, sealing the envelope and writing Lawson Pierce, 47 Sycamore Lane on the front. "See, I figure if you've been lying to me for 7 years, you've probably been lying to him too. And he deserves to know that his wife has been working night shifts at the hospital." Julia lunged across the table, trying to grab the envelope, but I pulled it back. Tom, no! You don't understand. The children. This will destroy their family. Their family? I stood up again, the envelope clutched in my hand. What about our family, Jules? What about the 7 years I spent thinking I was married to someone who loved me? I do love you. You love the idea of me. You love having a backup plan. You love knowing that if your perfect suburban life ever gets boring, you can always come home to your working-class husband who asks no questions and makes no demands. She was sobbing openly now, the kind of crying that comes from knowing you've been caught in a lie too big to explain away. Please, she whispered. Don't send that. We can work this out. I'll leave him. I'll choose you. Will you? Or will you just get better at lying? I walked to the kitchen counter and propped the envelope against the coffee maker where she could see it, but not reach it. I'm going to work, I announced. When I come home tonight, I want you gone. Take whatever belongs to you, but leave the wedding ring. That was based on a lie. Tom, and Jules, if you're not gone by the time I get home, I'm hand-delivering this envelope to Lawson Pierce. Let him decide what to do with a wife who's been cheating on him for 7 years. I left her sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by photographs of her secret life, crying into the breakfast I'd made with my own hands. The drive to work passed in a blur of anger and adrenaline. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Julia's Honda following me, but the road behind me stayed empty. At the construction site, I threw myself into physical labor with the kind of intensity that made my crew give me worried looks. I mixed concrete, hauled lumber, and swung a sledgehammer until my shirt was soaked with sweat and my hands were raw despite my work gloves. Boss, called Eddie Kowalski, my lead electrician and the closest thing I had to a best friend. You trying to demolish the whole building by yourself? Just working, I replied, not stopping to look at him. Working like a man with something eating at him. Eddie had been on my crew for 5 years. He was smart, reliable, and had an annoying habit of reading people like blueprints. He also had a wife who'd cheated on him during their 2nd year of marriage, so he recognized the signs. You want to talk about it? He asked. Nothing to talk about. Uh-huh. That's why you've been attacking that wall like it insulted your mother. I finally stopped swinging the sledgehammer and turned to face him. Eddie was short and stocky, with arms like tree trunks and a face that had been broken and reset more than once. He looked like a brawler, but he was actually one of the gentlest men I'd ever known. Julia's been cheating, I said. Figured it was something like that. How long? 7 years. Eddie whistled low. The whole marriage? Turns out she was already married when she married me. Been living a double life, 2 families, the whole thing. Christ. Eddie pulled off his hard hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But that was a lie. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I drove home that evening with my heart hammering against my ribs, half hoping Julia would still be there so we could have the fight that might somehow fix everything, half hoping she'd be gone so I wouldn't have to see her face when she tried to explain the unexplainable. The house was empty. She'd taken her clothes, her jewelry, and the framed photograph of her parents that had always sat on her nightstand. The wedding ring I'd asked her to leave behind was on the kitchen counter, next to a handwritten note that said simply, "I'm sorry, I never wanted to hurt you." The envelope addressed to Lawson Pierce was gone. I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now, staring at the empty closet where Julia's clothes had hung for 7 years. Half the hangers were missing, leaving gaps like broken teeth. The absence felt larger than the space she'd actually occupied. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Lawson Pierce. He'd included an address, not the house on Sycamore Lane, but a coffee shop downtown called The Grind, neutral territory. I texted back, "When?" His reply came immediately. "Now." The grind was one of those places that tried too hard to be quirky, with mismatched furniture and local artwork covering every wall. At 8 p.m. on a Friday night, it was nearly empty, except for a few college students hunched over laptops and a barista who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Lawson Pierce was sitting at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he was trying to draw warmth from the ceramic. He looked older than he had in my surveillance photos, with lines around his eyes and gray threading through his dark hair. When he saw me approaching, he stood up and extended his hand. "Tom Bradley?" "Yeah." I shook his hand, noting the firm grip and soft palms of someone who worked with his brain instead of his back. "Lawson Pierce. Thanks for coming." We sat down across from each other, two men who'd been married to the same woman without knowing it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "She showed me the pictures," Lawson said finally. "All of them?" "Enough." He took a sip of his coffee, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "How long have you known?" "Since Tuesday. You?" "She told me this afternoon, right before she disappeared." "Disappeared?" Lawson nodded. "Packed a bag and left. No forwarding address, no explanation beyond what was in your envelope. Just gone." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and confusion. He looked like a man whose world had just collapsed, which made sense because it had. "The kids?" I asked. "Don't know yet. Emma keeps asking where Mommy went. Jake's old enough to sense something's wrong, but not old enough to understand what." The barista was wiping down tables with the aggressive efficiency of someone who wanted to close early. Lawson and I sat in the awkward silence of two people who shared a devastating secret, but had nothing else in common. 8 years, Lawson said eventually. "What?" "I've been married to Julia for 8 years. We met at a hospital fundraiser. She was volunteering at the registration table." My stomach dropped. "What hospital?" "Mercy General. It was a charity event for their new cardiac wing." The same event where I'd met Julia. The same registration table. The same woman, working the same fundraiser, meeting two different men, and somehow managing to marry both of us. "When's your anniversary?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. "October 15th. Mine was October 22nd, 1 week later." "She married you first," I said. "Looks that way." Lawson finished his coffee and set the cup down with more force than necessary. "Which means your marriage was never legal." "I figured that out this morning." "So what now?" It was a good question. What do you do when you discover that your entire adult life has been built on a foundation of lies? How do you process the fact that the woman you loved, the woman you trusted with your heart and your future, had been living a completely separate existence for the entire duration of your relationship? "I don't know," I admitted. Lawson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been doing some research since this afternoon. Property records, financial documents, that sort of thing." He opened the folder and spread several papers across the table between us. Bank statements, mortgage documents, credit card records. "She's been using both our names," he said, pointing to a mortgage application. "Look at this. She put down your income and my credit score when she applied for a loan to refinance our house." I stared at the document, seeing my signature forged in Julia's careful handwriting. "That's fraud." "It gets worse." Lawson pulled out a credit card statement. "She opened accounts using information from both our credit histories. Been building debt that we're both potentially liable for." The numbers on the statement made my head spin. $37,000 in charges over the past 2 years. Restaurants, hotels, shopping trips, a vacation to Hawaii that neither Lawson nor I had taken. Where was she getting the money to pay for all this? That's the question, isn't it? Lawson gathered the papers back into the folder. Because according to these records, she's been making minimum payments using automatic withdrawals from accounts linked to both our checking accounts. I thought about the unexplained charges I'd noticed on our credit card statements, the restaurant bills and gas station purchases that Julia had explained away with stories about working late or covering for other nurses. "She's been stealing from both of us," I said. "For years." The coffee shop's overhead lights flickered, and the barista made pointed sounds about closing time. Lawson and I gathered our things and walked outside into the cold October night. "What are you going to tell your kids?" I asked. "I don't know yet. Emma's 6, Jake's 8. How do you explain to children that their mother has been living a lie?" We stood on the sidewalk outside the grind, two strangers bound together by betrayal and shared humiliation. Cars passed on the street, their headlights cutting through the darkness, carrying people home to families that were probably real. "She played us both," Lawson said. "Yeah. For years." "Yeah. I loved her," he said, and there was something broken in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. So did I. Past tense? I considered the question. Did I still love Julia, even knowing what she'd done? Could love survive this level of deception? "I don't know," I said honestly. Lawson nodded. "Me neither." He started walking toward a silver Mercedes parked at the curb, the same car I'd seen in the driveway on Sycamore Lane. "Lawson," I called after him. He turned back. "What are you going to do now?" "Try to figure out how to be a single father, I guess. You?" "Try to figure out how to start over." He got into his Mercedes and drove away, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop where two men had just discovered they'd been sharing a wife for 7 years. I drove home to my empty house and sat at the kitchen table where I'd confronted Julia 12 hours earlier. The photographs were still scattered across the surface, evidence of a double life that had finally been exposed. My phone buzzed with another text message, this one from Julia's number. "I know you both hate me. I know I've ruined everything. But I need you to understand. I never meant for it to happen this way. I loved you both. I still do." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Where are you?" Her response came quickly. "It doesn't matter. I can't face either of you right now. The kids are asking for you." "I know. Tell them I'm sorry." "Tell them yourself." But she didn't respond to that. The conversation thread showed that she'd read my message, but no reply came. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my living room, trying to process the wreckage of my marriage. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into its Friday night routine. Porch lights coming on, families gathering around dinner tables, couples settling in to watch movies together, normal people living normal lives, unaware that their neighbor had just discovered his wife was a bigamist who'd been stealing money and living a double life for 7 years. The bourbon burned going down, but it didn't touch the cold anger that was building in my chest. Julia had disappeared, leaving Lawson and me to clean up the mess she'd created. She'd taken the coward's way out, abandoning 2 families rather than facing the consequences of her choices. But running away wouldn't save her from what was coming, because I was done being the understanding husband who asked no questions and made no demands. I was done being the backup plan for someone who'd never really chosen me in the first place. Julia wanted to disappear? Fine. But first, she was going to learn what it felt like to have her carefully constructed world torn apart, piece by piece. Saturday morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that matched my mood perfectly. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, alternating between fury and something that felt like grief. By dawn, the grief had burned away, leaving only cold, focused anger. Julia thought she could just disappear and leave Lawson and me to deal with the aftermath of her lies. She was wrong. I made coffee and spread Lawson's financial documents across my kitchen table, studying the pattern of Julia's deception. The credit card charges told a story of someone living well beyond her means, funding a lifestyle that neither of her husbands could afford on their own. My phone rang at 8 a.m. Lawson's name appeared on the screen. She's been texting me, he said, without preamble. Me too. Where is she? Won't say, but she wants to meet, says she can explain everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's to explain? She's a bigamist and a thief who's been lying to both of us for years. The kids are asking questions I can't answer. So tell them the truth. They're 6 and 8 years old, Tom. I can't exactly explain that their mother has been leading a double life. I understood his dilemma, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. Julia had created this mess. The consequences were hers to own. What did you tell them? That Mommy had to go away for work, but Emma keeps crying and Jake's been acting out. They need to see her. Then make her come back. How? I'd been thinking about that question all night. Julia had disappeared because she was scared of facing what she'd done, scared of the legal consequences, scared of losing the children she'd been playing mother to for 8 years. Fear was something I could work with. Meet me at the grind in an hour, I said. I have an idea. Lawson was already there when I arrived, sitting at the same corner table we'd occupied the night before. He looked like he hadn't slept either, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble covering his jaw. You look terrible, I said, settling into the chair across from him. Feel worse. Emma wet the bed last night. First time in 2 years. Jake punched a hole in his bedroom wall. Kids are resilient. Are they? Because right now they think their mother abandoned them for no reason. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text conversation I'd had with Julia. She's monitoring her messages, still checking in, still trying to control the narrative. So she hasn't really disappeared. She's hiding, waiting for us to calm down and forgive her, waiting for things to go back to normal. Lawson studied the messages on my phone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we make it clear that normal doesn't exist anymore. I outlined my plan while Lawson listened with growing unease. It wasn't complicated, but it was comprehensive. Julia had built her double life on a foundation of secrets and lies. The solution was to eliminate the secrets. You want to destroy her publicly, Lawson said when I finished. I want to make sure she faces consequences for what she's done. What about the kids? What about them? They deserve to know who their mother really is. Lawson was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup like it might contain answers to questions he didn't want to ask. She's still their mother, he said finally. And she's still my wife, legally speaking, but that doesn't mean we have to protect her from the results of her own choices. This feels like revenge. Maybe it is. Maybe that's exactly what this situation calls for. I could see him wrestling with the decision, weighing his anger against his desire to protect his children from the ugly truth about their mother. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. Once we make this public, everyone will know. Everyone should know. Julia's been playing games with people's lives for years. Time to change the rules. Lawson pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. She texted me this morning. Says she's staying at a hotel. Needs time to think. What hotel? Wouldn't say, but she wants to meet tomorrow somewhere public where we can talk like adults. Perfect. Set it up. Tom, set it up, Lawson. It's time Julia learned what accountability looks like. He typed out a message while I watched. A few minutes later, Julia responded with a suggestion. Riverside Park, near the playground. Sunday at 2 p.m. She wants to meet where the kids can't see us, Lawson said, reading her message. Of course she does, still trying to control the situation. I stood up and dropped a $5 bill on the table for my coffee. I'll see you tomorrow at 2. What are you going to do until then? Research. I spent Saturday afternoon at the public library, using their computers to dig deeper into Julia's financial deceptions. The more I discovered, the angrier I became. She hadn't just been stealing money. She'd been systematically defrauding both of us, using our identities to build credit and secure loans that neither of us knew existed. The scope of her betrayal was staggering. Over the course of 7 years, she'd accumulated nearly $60,000 in debt using forged documents and false information. She'd opened credit cards in my name, used Lawson's social security number to secure a personal loan, and even filed joint tax returns with both of us in different years. By 6 p.m., I had enough evidence to send Julia to prison for fraud, identity theft, and bigamy. But prison was too easy. Prison would let her play the victim, let her claim she'd made mistakes out of love rather than calculated greed. I wanted something more personal. Sunday arrived cold and bright, with the kind of autumn sunshine that made everything look crisp and clean. I arrived at Riverside Park 15 minutes early and found a bench with a clear view of the playground where Julia had suggested we meet. She was already there, sitting on a swing set designed for children, her feet barely touching the ground. She'd always been petite, but today she looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of her exposed lies. Lawson arrived exactly at 2, walking across the park with the measured stride of a man preparing for an unpleasant but necessary task. Julia saw him coming and stood up, smoothing down her jacket in a gesture I recognized as nervous preparation. I stayed on my bench, watching the reunion of my wife and her other husband. They talked for maybe 10 minutes before Julia started crying. Even from a distance, I could see her shoulders shaking, could see Lawson's posture softening as she reached out to touch his arm. She was playing the repentant victim, hoping that tears and apologies would be enough to fix 7 years of systematic deception. I walked over to join them. "Tom," Julia said when she saw me approaching. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a tremulous smile. "Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it." The 3 of us stood in an awkward triangle near the swing set, 2 betrayed husbands and the woman who'd been lying to both of us since the day we met her. "I know you're both angry," Julia began. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get so complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling bigamy now?" "I fell in love with both of you," she said, fresh tears starting to flow. "I couldn't choose. I thought I could make it work, thought I could keep everyone happy." "By lying to everyone," Lawson said. "I was protecting you, both of you. I knew that if you found out about each other, it would destroy everything we'd built." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I'd prepared a comprehensive email detailing Julia's financial crimes, complete with photocopied documents and account numbers. The recipient list included her supervisor at the hospital, her parents, Lawson's neighbors, and every contact in her social media accounts. "What is that?" she asked. "The truth," I said. "Everything you've done, documented and ready to share with everyone who knows you." Julia's face went white. "Tom, you can't..." "Can't what? Can't tell people that you're a bigamist who's been stealing money and living a double life? Why not? The children will learn that their mother is a liar and a thief. Better they find out now than spend the rest of their lives wondering why Mommy disappeared." Lawson was staring at my phone with something that might have been admiration or might have been horror. "You're really going to do this?" Julia whispered. "I'm really going to do this. What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to face what you've done instead of running away from it." "I'll do anything," she said. "I'll pay back the money, I'll get counseling, "You'll come back," I interrupted. "You'll face your children and explain why Mommy has been lying to them their entire lives. You'll sit down with both families and tell them exactly what you've been doing for the past 7 years. And if I do that, you won't send that email?" I looked at Lawson, who nodded slowly. "If you do that," I said, "we'll consider it a start." Julia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. "When?" "Tonight, 6 p.m. Your house on Sycamore Lane." "Both families?" "Both families. Time for everyone to meet." She closed her eyes, and I watched her shoulders sag with defeat. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." At 6 p.m. on Sunday evening, I parked my truck across the street from 47 Sycamore Lane and watched two families prepare to learn the truth about Julia Pierce Bradley, or whatever her real name actually was. Lawson's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with Julia's Honda. Through the large front windows, I could see people moving around inside the well-lit colonial house. A normal family scene, except nothing about this family had ever been normal. I walked up the circular driveway and rang the doorbell, carrying a manila folder containing copies of every document I'd gathered over the past 3 days: financial records, photographs, marriage certificates, and a timeline of Julia's deceptions that stretched back 8 years. Lawson answered the door. He looked exhausted but determined, like a man who'd finally decided to stop avoiding difficult conversations. "She's in the living room," he said. "Kids are upstairs, but they'll be down for dinner soon." I followed him through a foyer that was bigger than my entire kitchen. The house was exactly what I'd expected from someone in Lawson's profession: expensive furniture, hardwood floors, and the kind of decorative touches that suggested money and taste. Julia was sitting on the sectional sofa where I'd photographed her with the children, wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes and made her look younger than her 36 years. She'd always known how to present herself, how to be exactly what people wanted to see. "Tom," she said, standing up as I entered the room. "Thank you for coming." "Where are they?" "Upstairs, playing video games while the adults talk." "No more adult conversations," I said, settling into an armchair across from her. "Time for everyone to hear the truth." Julia looked at Lawson, who shrugged. "We agreed, Jules. No more secrets." She nodded reluctantly and called upstairs. "Emma, Jake, come down for dinner." 2 sets of feet thundered down the staircase, and the children I'd seen in my surveillance photos burst into the living room. The girl, Emma, was small and energetic, with Julia's auburn hair and green eyes. The boy, Jake, was taller and more serious, studying me with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old, encountering a stranger in his home. "Kids," Julia said, her voice carefully controlled, "I want you to meet someone. This is Tom Bradley." "Hi," Emma said politely. Jake just stared. "Tom is—" Julia hesitated, searching for words that would make sense to children. "Tom is someone very important to Mommy. Someone I should have told you about a long time ago." "Are you Mommy's friend?" Emma asked me. I looked at Julia, who was watching her children with an expression of absolute terror. "I'm your mother's husband," I said. The room went quiet except for the sound of the grandfather clock in the corner ticking away seconds that felt like hours. "But Daddy's Mommy's husband," Jake said, pointing at Lawson. "That's right," I agreed. "Your daddy is married to your mommy, and so am I." Emma looked confused. Jake looked suspicious. Lawson looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. "How can Mommy have 2 husbands?" Emma asked. "She can't," I said. "That's against the law, but your mommy did it anyway." Julia started crying again, but this time the tears looked different. Less like manipulation, more like genuine grief for what she was about to lose. "I can explain," she said to her children. "Please do," I said. "Explain to Emma and Jake why you've been lying to them their entire lives." "Tom," Lawson warned. "No, she wanted to do this. She can do it right." Julia knelt down in front of her children, taking their hands in hers. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," she began. "Big mistakes that hurt people they love." "What kind of mistakes?" Jake asked. "I fell in love with 2 different men," Julia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your daddy and Tom. I loved them both so much that I couldn't choose between them." "So you married both of them?" Jake's 8-year-old logic was cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Yes, but that's not allowed." "No, it's not allowed. I broke the rules because I was selfish and scared." Emma was starting to cry now, not understanding the conversation, but sensing that something fundamental was changing in her world. "Does Tom live with us too?" she asked. "No, sweetheart. Tom lives in a different house. I've been going back and forth between two families for a very long time." "Is that where you go on your work nights?" Jake asked. Julia nodded, unable to speak. I watched this conversation unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been pity. These children were learning that their mother was a liar, but they were also losing the security that comes from believing your parents are good people who make good choices. "What happens now?" Jake asked, and the question was directed at me rather than his parents. "Now your mother has to decide which family she wants to keep," I said. "Tom," Lawson said sharply. That's exactly what this is," I interrupted. "Julia's been playing house with both of us for years. Time to choose." Julia looked up at me from where she was kneeling in front of her children, and I saw something new in her expression. Not fear or grief, but anger. "You want me to choose?" she said, standing up. "Fine. I choose them." She gestured toward Emma and Jake, who were watching their parents with wide, frightened eyes. "I choose my children, who need their mother more than either of you need a wife who's been lying to you for years." "That's not how this works," I said. "Isn't it?" Julia's voice was getting stronger, more confident. "You want revenge, Tom. You want to punish me for not choosing you first, for not making you the center of my universe. I want you to face consequences for what you've done. And I am. I'm losing both of you. I'm losing my marriage, my financial security, probably my job when word gets out. My children are learning that their mother is a liar and a cheat. What more do you want?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the email I'd prepared. "I want everyone to know what you are." "And what am I, Tom? What am I besides a woman who made terrible choices because she was too cowardly to hurt people she loved?" "You're a bigamist, a thief, a fraud." "I'm a mother," she said, putting her arms around Emma and Jake. "And whatever else I've done wrong, I've been a good mother to these children." "Have you?" "Because good mothers don't teach their children that lying is acceptable. Good mothers protect their children from unnecessary pain. By modeling dishonesty and deception." Julia was quiet for a moment, holding her children close while Lawson and I watched from opposite sides of a living room that had become a courtroom. "Send your email," she said finally. "Tell everyone what I've done. But understand that you're not just punishing me. You're punishing two innocent children who never asked to be part of this mess." I looked at Emma, who was crying quietly into her mother's dress, at Jake, who was trying to be brave but couldn't hide the confusion and fear in his eyes. "They deserve to know the truth," I said, but my voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Do they? Do they really need to know that their mother is a criminal? That their family is built on lies? Or do they just need to know that Mommy made mistakes and is trying to fix them?" Lawson cleared his throat. "Maybe we should discuss this privately." "No more private discussions," Julia said. "No more secrets. Tom wants everything out in the open, so let's have it all out in the open." She turned to face me directly. "You want to know why I chose Lawson first? Why I married him before I married you?" "Julia," Lawson started, "because he offered me stability, security, a house in a good neighborhood and the promise of children and a normal life." "And me?" I asked. "You offered me passion, excitement, the feeling that I was more than just a wife and mother, that I was someone worth fighting for. So you decided to have both." "I decided I was too selfish to give up either one." Emma had stopped crying and was listening to this conversation with the intense focus that children bring to adult problems they don't fully understand. "Are you going to leave us, Mommy?" she asked. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." "What about Tom?" Julia looked at me, and I saw something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Not fear or anger or manipulation, but genuine sorrow. "Tom has his own life," she said. "His own house, his own job, his own friends. He doesn't need me." But you're married to him. Sometimes marriages end, Emma, even when people still care about each other. I stared at Julia, processing what she'd just said. She was choosing Lawson and the children, choosing the family she'd built first, the life that offered her the most to lose. What about the money? I asked. The fraud, the identity theft, all the financial crimes? I'll pay it back, every penny. It might take years, but I'll pay it back. With what? You're about to lose your job. I'll find another job. I'll do whatever it takes. Lawson had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he spoke up. What about us, Jules? What about our marriage? I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if you can forgive me for what I've done. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. But you're choosing to try. I'm choosing to try. I looked around the living room at this family that was falling apart and somehow holding together at the same time. Julia, with her arms around her children, Lawson, watching his wife with a mixture of love and betrayal, two kids trying to understand why their world had suddenly become so complicated. Send the email, Julia said to me. If that's what you need to do to feel like justice has been served, send it. I looked at my phone, at the message that would destroy whatever reputation Julia had left, that would ensure her children grew up knowing their mother was publicly humiliated for her crimes. Tom, Jake said suddenly, are you going to take our mommy away? The question hit me like a physical blow. I looked at this 8-year-old boy who was trying to protect his mother from a stranger he'd just met, and I realized that my revenge had consequences beyond Julia's suffering. No, I said, putting my phone away. I'm not going to take your mommy away. Julia's eyes widened with surprise. You're not sending the email? I'm not sending the email. Why not? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street where children rode bicycles and families lived normal lives built on foundations of truth and trust. Because those kids have been through enough, I said. Because destroying you won't fix what's broken between us. So, what happens now? I turned back to face the room. Now you file for divorce from me, a real divorce, legal and final. You pay back every penny you stole, and you figure out how to rebuild your life with the family you chose. And you? I figure out how to start over. I walked toward the front door, but Emma's voice stopped me. Tom? I turned back. Are you sad? The question was so simple, so direct, that I didn't know how to answer it with anything but honesty. Yes, Emma, I'm very sad. I'm sorry Mommy made you sad. Thank you. I left the house on Sycamore Lane and drove home through streets that looked the same as they had 3 days earlier, but felt completely different. My marriage was over, my trust was shattered, and my future was a blank page that I had no idea how to fill. But I hadn't become the kind of man who destroys children to punish their mother, and somehow that felt like enough.